Today, we're going to let you run the show. We've gotten a lot of comments about the video we did on this 1965 Studebaker Wagonaire, so we're going to use those comments to talk more about this really cool car. Hi there, Rick DeBrule here with another, well, I don't know if I can call it a chapter of the automotive evolution. This is more of a footnote because this is a follow-up to our previous video on this car right here, a 1965 Studebaker Wagonaire, just one of more than 170 cars that's here at the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. A great collection. If you're in the Phoenix area, it's one of those places you have to come by. If you're a car guy, you will absolutely love this place. So your comments had a lot of great information about this Wagonaire, and I thought I'd start by addressing one thing that I made a mistake on, and that's the fact that this car did indeed have seat belts. In fact, this is a 1965, and in 1965, U.S. law mandated that all cars produced in the United States had to have seat belts. Now, interestingly, it was a decade earlier, 1955, that California Motor Vehicle Code actually stated that cars sold in California had to have seat belts. Now, those were mostly dealer installed, but by 1965, the manufacturer was responsible for putting those in. Having said that, what I can tell you is, having grown up in the 1960s, now our family had a Rambler station wagon, very similar to this one right here. We weren't using them. In fact, we weren't using the seatbelts no matter where we were. Half the time we were living in the back of the station wagon, kind of rambling around back there as kids, looking the other way if it had one of those seats that, looked out the back. So seatbelts were not very commonly used. All the research you see from back then shows that seatbelts were just not being used. That's why they eventually went to the retractable type, the three-point harnesses, things that were both safer and easier to use. Because a lot of times what would happen is the seatbelt would just get thrown off to the side, people would forget about them and not use them. So getting people to use seatbelts was very, very important. So it's important to remember, this 1965 Studebaker, yes, indeed, it did have seatbelts, and not just because Studebaker wanted to be safe, it's because by 1965, it was mandated here in the United States. So this Wagonaire concept was an interesting idea, but as we pointed out in the original video, it really wasn't very successful. But I have to say, Studebaker did a really good job of trying to make it seem like it was successful. They had a lot of advertisements calling it, very innovative and creative, all that kind of stuff. But once again, it just didn't sell well. And as people pointed out in our comments, the people who were around these when they were kids, these roof rails leaked an awful lot. Now, some of the folks in the comments pointed out that Studebaker actually made available a camper top for this. I'm sure Studebaker wasn't building, it was probably some aftermarket company. But there was a camper that you could mount into this open section in the back. Now, can you imagine how heavy it was and how horrible this car was probably handling? But I got to give them credit. Their goal was versatility, and the concept of being able to stick a camper into the back of this Studebaker station wagon was pretty darn creative. And when you look at those pictures of that Studebaker Wagonaire camper, well, it looks good on paper, like I say. I'm sure when you drove it, that big top-heavy thing waggling with all that extra weight in the back of the car, it probably wasn't very safe at all. From a collectability perspective, I think the Studebaker Wagonaire would actually be a great car to own right now because, quite frankly, there aren't very many of these left. Now, I've seen prices for these ranging anywhere from about $10,000 all the way up to more than $30,000. It just depends, obviously, on the quality of it. But here's the great thing. If you buy one of these, you're not just buying an orphan car. What you're buying is something that's really interesting, an important step, once again, in the automotive evolution. A company trying to do something new and innovative. And I can pretty much guarantee if you buy yourself a Studebaker Wagonaire, well, you're probably going to be the only person at the car show with one of these. Also in our comments, some folks pointed out that you could get a small version of this, a little diecast, probably 164 scale, made by a company called Husky. And there were several versions of it. For example, there was one version that was done up as a TV camera crew car. There was a big camera mounted in the back, as if the TV crew was on their way out to the scene, and the versatility of the Studebaker Wagonaire made that possible. I also on eBay found an ambulance version. And once again, you can find these and buy these today. If you're interested in the Wagonaire, there are little versions of them available. Now, you would think if they were willing to make the diecast, it was because the car was so popular. Once again, it wasn't. But at least they made diecast that we can at least buy a small version of them today. That Wagonaire is not the only Studebaker that we have here at the Martin Auto Museum. We also have this 1951 Studebaker Champion Starlight Coupe. How do you love this styling on the front, that big bullet nose? But I think this will be a video for another day, another chapter in the automotive evolution.